Hi, I'm Bob Cummings. Today's text is Mark 3, 7 through 34. These passages cover a wide range of Jesus' activities, from healing the sick and attracting great crowds, from empowering and sending his disciples out to heal and preach, to answering his critics, the religious elite who are trying to discredit him, and finally kind of gathering with people who are interested in following him and expanding the definition of what they perceived was the family of God. So I'll be focusing on just a few of the verses today because I can't cover it all. I'll start with verses 7 through 12 and 22 to 26, and then later I'll close with verses 31 through 35. So I'd like to read. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great crowd followed from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and Idumea, from beyond the Jordan and from around Tyre and Sidon. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. And he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, lest they crush him. For he had healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. And whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." And he strictly ordered them not to make him known. And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem were saying, "He's possessed by Beelzebul, and by the prince of demons he casts out demons." And he called to them and said to them in parables, "How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom shall not stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand." These first verses kind of describe the pandemonium of all the people coming to see Jesus. And, I imagine there was all types in the crowd. There was obviously the sick. They'd heard that he was healing, and so obviously they're there. There was those who were probably just trying to find out who this Jesus guy was and what the rage was. And I'm sure there were those who were truly trying to find the Messiah or the Son of God and to see if this Jesus guy really was it. They might even been believers. But there was also in the crowd, there was also the religious leaders. And they were there to try to discredit him and try to shoot down his ministry. But the crowd was so great that Jesus basically asked his disciples to put out a boat and so that he could speak to them. Now, when I look back at these people who came to visit, I see that I understand the sick being there, I understand the curious being there, but the ones that really intrigued me were the religious leaders and the demons. Because despite the love that Jesus modeled, despite the miracles he performed, despite the righteous life that he was living, and the scriptures that he was following, the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees, were really riled up against him. They rose up against him. They attacked him. They tried to trick him with trick questions, the kind that if he says the answer is no, it seems like he's against the people. If he says the answer is yes, then he's against God, because that's what Scripture said. But somehow he was able to thwart those questions. So then they resorted to other tactics. When he healed a man on the Sabbath day, they cited the rules and said, "He's working on the Sabbath day. How can he do that?" When he healed other people, they said he healed in the name of Satan rather than the name of God. Well, Jesus, like I said before, thwarted all of these, and his popularity continued to grow. So the religious leaders, they grew more and more jealous, and they decided that they would plot to kill him. The Pharisees, the religious leaders, really did try to follow the Scriptures, so it kind of struck me as odd that those who love the Scriptures seem to hate Jesus, and that they protected their rules and they protected their status so much that they didn't realize that the Messiah they were waiting for was right there in their presence. But the demons didn't. They knew exactly who Jesus was. They knew who he was. They called out about him. He told them to be quiet because it wasn't quite time for him to let the world know that he was the Son of God. But they didn't want Jesus. They didn't want his forgiveness. They didn't want changed lives. They didn't want him to be anywhere near him. They wanted Jesus nothing but to be far away from him. Now, these two extremes struck me as tragic. First off, the religious leaders who spent their whole life studying the Scriptures, praying for the Messiah, looking for the Messiah, waiting for the Messiah, were so wrapped up in their position and their rules that they couldn't see that the Messiah was right there amongst them. And the demons, who knew who Jesus was, knew he was the Messiah, they didn't want to have anything to do with him. I just found those both kind of ironic and tragic. Do you acknowledge Jesus? Do you want to see Jesus? Do you want to obey Jesus? Regardless how you answer these questions, Jesus has hope for you. Let's read the last 4 verses. And his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside they sent him and called him. The crowds were sitting around, and they said to him, Your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you. And he answered them, Who are my mother, and who are my brothers? And looking about at those who sat around him, he said, Here are my mother, and here are my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother, and my sister, and my mother. Jesus wasn't being disrespectful of his own mom and brothers. They cared about him, and they were there because they cared about him. But he expanded the spiritual definition of what Jesus' family is. God is an inclusive God. He wants all who do his will and all who love him to be in his family. It doesn't matter what imperfections you have. Our church has got a saying where we say no perfect people are allowed in our church. And trust me, there aren't any there. But that doesn't stop us from wanting to be more like Jesus. And that doesn't stop Jesus from wanting us. I pray that we, you and I, don't miss Jesus because of the barriers we put up between him and us, or stop from being part of his family. He is gracious, and he loves us, and he loves you. Have a great day.